Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 3, Episode 8 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 5 and the rest of the 2023 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. Nick, big week. Some unfortunate injuries. We're kind of getting a clearing as to who the top dogs are, who the bottom feeders are, and we're getting more clarity on our fantasy team. So we're in full effect in fantasy football, full effect in NFL football, and yeah, we're right there.
Yeah, now, 4 weeks in, we have a lot more knowledge on these teams. We always said week 1, you overreact. Week 2, you kind of know if it was an overreaction. Week 3 kind of confirms itself. But week 4, 4 weeks in, you really know, okay, this team's really good. This team's not really good. This team's middle of the pack. Most importantly for your fantasy teams, what defenses are horrendously tough matchups. Like a team like Kansas City has come out and surprised us, where a team like, the Cowboys have always been one of those elite teams that you don't trust, or the 49ers, right? Like, we have a lot more of these things we thought before the preseason confirmed. So now me and Nick can really lock in and give you even better fantasy football advice than we already were.
We'll try our best at least. So big week for the NFL, big week for fantasy football. As always, a big show today. We'll go through the waiver wire for week 5, a little bit more thin the past few weeks, but that's kind of how it goes as the season goes on. And we'll give you a week 4 recap, the biggest fantasy takeaways from every single game from week 4. It's going to be some hot takes, going to be a lot of fun. And it's a big week for Nick, who by the time you listen to the show might be a father. So we'll see where that kind of takes us. So before we get into the show, as always, have some plugs for you guys. If you enjoyed the show and it's your first time, or if it's your first time listening to us, I should say welcome and thank you for joining the Primetime Fantasy Podcast. You can find the show every week. Occasionally we're live, but the show will always be uploaded to all audio streaming platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Anchor. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. We would appreciate that. If you'd rather watch and listen to the show, whether it's live or recorded, go to our YouTube channel, Primetime Fantasy Podcast. If you're on that YouTube channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you drop a like on this video and any video that you watch in the future. And of course, make sure to hit that little bell icon so every single time we do go live, you get a little notification for that. We are going to try to do our one weekly show live, but today I'm going to the Seahawks and the Giants game, so hopefully it's fun for me. So we could not go live tonight, but that's okay. So without further ado, we could get into the show. We're going to go to waiver wire week 5, the biggest waiver wire targets from all positions to help you bolster those rosters. So starting off, Nick, with some quarterbacks. Me and you have kind of been screaming for CJ Stroud over the past few weeks, and he's still only owned in 32% of leagues. I do think in ESPN, by the way, when we say owned in X% of leagues, we are just going off of ESPN just so we have a baseline. But, in most fantasy leagues, he's probably only owned in 30%. But I think after this week, he's going to be owned at probably upwards of 50%. 3 straight weeks with over 20 fantasy points. He hasn't had below 10. He's only a rookie and just seems to be getting better. Nick, your thoughts on adding CJ Stroud? My personal first, thought is that if you don't have a top waiver claim, you may have already missed your opportunity to claim him. When we've been saying for the past 2 weeks, make him your backup quarterback.
No, absolutely. And Stroud, he's been phenomenal. Me and Nick, like Nick said, we've been all in on him. Since pretty early on. I think after week 1, we both said this guy's good, but how good for fantasy? And after week 2, we said he'd be consistent in 3 straight games over 20. That's more than good enough to be in your lineups. He's right now the QB 10, according to Fantasy Pros on the season, over guys like Justin Fields, Jared Goff, Anthony Richardson, Matt Stafford, Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, Deshaun Watson, all these guys you drafted in that mid-round range. So for me, I think you need to roster him if you're in a 2 quarterback league. You need to start playing him. You need to start trusting him. If you had a guy like Derek Carr as your backup, or a guy like Aaron Rodgers as your backup, go down for the year, or even a guy like Dak Prescott, who has not been great, it is worth rostering CJ Stroud over guys like that.
Next quarterback, Nick threw this one in here. We have Sam Howell, only owned in 9% of fantasy leagues. There you go. He almost beat those Philadelphia Eagles yesterday or on Sunday. So, Nick, what are your thoughts on possibly adding Sam Howell? Probably not as a starter, but, as a backup.
I think he's definitely worth a roster at this point. I do think this week he is worth the play. He's had 4 games so far this season. The only one where he had a poor performance was against the Bills, and we know that the Commanders will not match up with the Bills at all. But in his other 3 games, 16, 22, and 20, that's very solid for your fantasy quarterback. And this week he goes up on Thursday Night Football as a 7-point favorite against the Chicago Bears. They should have absolutely no problem smushing them. And that offense, there is nobody on that defense that's going to hang with guys like Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson on the outside. The weapons are there. The end zone is going to be wide open. And in a favorable matchup for Howell, I think this is the first time you can really confidently lock him into your lineup. And I do think same thing as Stroud. If you need your QB2, I do think that there's a lot of guys you drafted late in your draft where Howell is proving to have more value, and he's a guy I want on my team.
I'm not as eager to pick up Howell as Nick is, but if you drafted maybe Aaron Rodgers and a backup, you probably need somebody. If you drafted Derek Carr, I think he's very droppable. So there are options where you could add Howell to your team and he could start in your lineup depending on the matchup. Moving on to running backs, we're thin. Running back's always a thin position, but we only have one this week. It's a result of an injury, and that's kind of where I think running backs are going to feature on the waiver wire the rest of the season. And that's unfortunate because we're not going to root for injuries, but the top guys are just taken. That's just kind of how it is. So the one running back we do have available for you guys to add in your leagues is Jaleel McLaughlin. And he is only owned in less than 1% of leagues. He's the backup for the Denver Broncos. The rookie came in and came in and replaced Javonte Williams after he went out with a hip flexor in week 4. It's not a serious injury, so we probably will see Javonte Williams back on the field in the next 2 weeks, but this is an opportunity for McLaughlin to really assert himself as a top back in that offense, or to just be a spot start for your fantasy team. Maybe you have Austin Eckler, who we aren't sure if he's going to play this week, so maybe you do have somebody that you need to start in place of. But Nick, your thoughts on adding him to your team this week?
Yeah, I'm totally in on it. I'm looking at other matchups where he might be more favorable. This week he goes up against the Jets, who are not built to stop the run. They're built to stop the pass. And Isaiah Pacheco this past week just put on a monster day against them. I'm looking at guys like Ramondre Stevenson against the Saints. I'd still rather play him. But you look at like Najee Harris, who's been super inconsistent going up against the Ravens. I'd rather take the risk on a guy with a high ceiling, and he proved it with only seven rushing attempts, 3 catches, put up close to 20 fantasy points this week. So he's definitely going to get more of a workload. He should be locked in for 12 to 15 touches, probably gets 3 to 5 pass attempts. A guy that I think that I would definitely start him over. I don't like Alexander Madison going up against the Kansas City front 7. I think Nick Bolton, Chris Jones have been phenomenal against running backs. I do not want that matchup. So if you pick him up as a 1 week off, like for this matchup, I think it's a good move. I'd rather do it.
All right, moving on to receivers. First one here, we have Romeo Doubs. Now, Doubs is a guy who's kind of been on our list for the last few weeks, and he has 18-plus fantasy points over the last 3 games, at least, or in each of the last 3 games, 18-plus fantasy points. He's only owned in 30% of leagues right now. And even last week, he had 18 with Christian Watson back out on the field. So he does have a connection with Jordan Love. I can't tell you who's going to be the number 1 receiver when the season ends with Green Bay, but I think they are going to spread the wealth a little bit, and Romeo Doubs will be a top option over there. So, Nick, what are your thoughts about adding Romeo Doubs to your fantasy team?
I think he's been very solid so far. We have not seen a fully healthy Christian Watson with him, which is a little bit concerning, but he belongs on your lineup. If a guy's going to put up 18-plus points in 3 games, as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1, maybe by the end of the season for your team, like especially in a sophomore potential breakout season, like everything kind of hits that check mark where it's worth the roster spot at least. I'm not saying you have to go rush to throw him in your lineup, but right now he's a wide receiver 16 on the season. Like you can't really turn that down if he's on your waiver wire.
Yep, agree with Nick. He definitely should be a priority if you're in, the top 3 or 4 waiver slots. Next up, we have Jameson Williams, the second-year receiver for the Detroit Lions, only owned in 16% of fantasy leagues. He had a rough rookie season. They drafted him knowing he was hurt, went on the PUP, showed some flashes of talent, but never really got hot last year. Now this year he started with a suspension due to gambling. It was supposed to be a 6-game suspension, got reduced to 4. So now he is eligible to return to practice this week. So your thoughts on drafting the sophomore receiver who will join the likes of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Reynolds, and Sam Laporta?
I think he's easily going to step in and he's going to take a role in this offense. I think Amon-Ra is still going to be the clear one, but he's been getting dinged up a lot this season. So Jameson Williams is going to be the best option as their wide receiver 2 and their second pass catching option in this offense, at least from the wide receiver standpoint. And the wide receiver 2 for the Lions so far, you've had Josh Reynolds really taking that charge. 12, 24, missed a game, and then 10 fantasy points returning from the injury. So you're looking at 3 very solid fantasy performances from a guy that's a pretty average NFL receiver at best. So putting a guy that was drafted in the top 16 with a first-round pick, there is no doubt that he should be in line for a big fantasy season.
Yeah, I think he's worth the ad. It might take him a week or 2 to get going, but I think he is worth the ad, especially since a lot of leagues do have, a good chunk of roster spots. So I think he is worth adding and seeing what happens. Next up, we have one of Nick's guys, Joshua Palmer, who has had a rapport with Herbert in the past. The coaches have always been high on him, but he's always sat behind Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And now Mike Williams is out for the year with the, I think it was an ACL. So now we have Joshua Palmer slotting in there. But we also have Quentin Johnston, the rookie, behind him. But Joshua Palmer has back-to-back games of 10-plus fantasy points. He's only 47% of fantasy leagues. I don't know if Quentin Johnston does lap him at some point this year. So, Nick, your thoughts on Palmer, adding him and having him for the rest of the season?
2 years ago, when the Chargers drafted Palmer, their idea was for him to replace Mike Williams with all the injuries that had built up. And Mike Williams was going into a contract year, and Mike Williams stayed healthy and was phenomenal and got paid big bucks and has been great and has not missed significant time since. But in the games where he has missed, or Keenan Allen has missed, Josh Palmer has easily slid into that wide receiver 2 role in a very high-powered offense. Kellen Moore there, that offense is pushing the ball downfield. They're putting up a ton of points, and Eckler is not really stealing a lot of that goal line work anymore because he's been out with injury since week 1. So you're looking at a lot of check marks and a lot of opportunity for a guy that's going to high-powered offense, has been a very solid receiver. I've seen enough 15 to 20-point games from Josh Palmer to want him on my roster. And this past week, where you didn't know if it was going to be him or Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer played 97% of plays where there was a route run, and he had 8 targets in the game. So that is a very solid production to instantly put in your lineup and put onto your fantasy team. I think he's worth a flex play. If you're mixing a guy like Higgins or Evans on by, or one of those guys, definitely worth considering a start.
Next up, we have Michael Wilson. I watched a lot of this young receiver play because I was very focused on the Cardinals game for reasons on Sunday. So he's the rookie wide receiver out of Stanford, 3rd-round pick, only owned in 1.4% of leagues. He has 10-plus fantasy points and 26 fantasy points in each of the last, 10-plus week 3, 26-plus week 4. So very productive. And he has Josh Jacobs as the quarterback, he's not a rookie. He's played a couple years, but new quarterback. So becoming a favorite target, possibly. So what are your thoughts about possibly adding this Arizona pass catcher to your fantasy bench?
I mean, listen, if you want to add him, you can. I would not prioritize him over any receiver that we already listed. Just because I don't know when you will, like, if Michael Wilson went out this week and put up a 25-point game again, or the following week, are you going to say, I confidently want to put him in my starting lineup? No, maybe. Probably not. If he would need a couple very good games. This felt like more of a 1-week outlier, even though his production has gone up over the last 4 weeks. For me, where I would trust a Jameson Williams or Josh Palmer or Romeo Doubs or the next receiver we're going to talk about to slot in a lot more than I would maybe the 4th catching receiving option for the Arizona Cardinals.
He might be number 2, but again, I don't know either. Next up, Tyler Boyd, owned in 43% of leagues, has been very, very productive for the Bengals in his career, especially with Joe Burrow. T. Higgins is hurt. Nick's a T. Higgins owner. Surprisingly, I thought I knew all the players that Nick drafted in the early rounds. I didn't know he had T. Higgins on a team, but if you're a Bengals fan, that man right there is the one to blame.
Yes,
for the Bengals injuries and problems. So, Nick, as a T. Higgins owner, is Tyler Boyd going to become a priority for you?
For sure. In week 2, we saw a lot of when the Bengals are successful on offense and they got the ball downfield. They didn't win the game, but they put up a lot of points. Tyler Boyd can be very productive, and now he's going to instantly step into the wide receiver 2 role. And I know the Bengals have not been great, but on a very high-powered, high-motor offense where there is no ceiling for the amount of points that they can score. I do think Jamar Chase will become a much bigger focal point. I think he'll see a lot closer to that 12 to 15 target range, which should help for the guys that drafted him in the
He's
first
always
round.
open.
Yeah, he's always open, always open. But Tyler Boyd's been reliable. Like he kind of reminds me of Randall Cobb like 5 years ago,
It's a
where
good one.
he's like on the field and he's a
I
veteran
said
receiver.
Cobb or like Adam Thielen on the Vikings.
Yeah, exactly. Like veteran or like AJ Green. They're both Bengals, but at some point, but you know what I mean. Like it's the veteran receiver that's just out on the field, will find a way to get open, will have trust in his quarterback. So I think he's worth the ad. I don't like him over the first 3 receivers we named, but and a guy like Tyler Boyd, I'd much rather have than a guy like Michael Wilson.
The Bengals also have the Cardinals and the Seahawks as their next 2 opponents. These are get-right games for them. I do love my Seahawks. They're a solid football team, but if the Bengals are going to turn the season around, these are the 2 teams that they definitely want to go against. And I'm not knocking my Seahawks. I love my Seahawks. But if the Bengals are going to be the Super Bowl contenders we thought they would be, then these are the 2 games that you got to win and turn yourself around, because then they got a little bit of a gauntlet coming up. Okay, next up, tight ends. Only got 1 here, and I am not adding this tight end. I need to hear Nick's case. Here's Jonnu Smith, owned in less than 1% of leagues, the backup for the Falcons, who don't throw the ball. So let's hear it.
Backup? I don't know what you're talking about. The Falcons are a team that love to pass the ball to the tight end position, and they love to give the ball to their superstar tight end, all the talent in the world. You definitely drafted him in your fantasy draft. Not Kyle Pitts, Jonnu Smith. Who right now is the tight end 11 on the season, just put up 15.5. His target share is the thing to me that's been the most impressive week over week. And at a position where you're never really going to see a lot of target share, it's been very solid. Give me 1 second to try and pull it up, but I believe he was looking at like 6, 5, 8.
I'll let you take a look at that. I look at who the quarterback is on that team, and I can't do it. I can't roster. This is why I didn't target Drake London, didn't target Kyle Pitts, and Ritter was winning games, and now I think he's lost the last 2, if I'm correct. Lost to Green Bay and lost to Jacksonville. And Jacksonville's probably a better team than them. I don't know about Green Bay. And now they have the Texans this week, and this week really tell us a lot. If the Falcons should go get Kirk Cousins. So I'm on this train now, because if the Falcons go and get Kirk Cousins, Drake London's an 1,000-yard receiver. Kyle Pitts is an 1,000-yard receiver. If the Vikings are truly shopping Kirk Cousins, go get Kirk Cousins. There has to be somebody better that the Falcons can start at quarterback than Desmond Ritter. I would rather see Wentz out there.
Well, I think Heineke would be a good pivot for them, who they have on
maybe, but I mean,
I think that I wouldn't be surprised if Atlanta landed Justin Fields when he doesn't work out this year and they go after Caleb Williams. The last 3 weeks, and week 1, he saw like practically no time on the field. The last 3 weeks, 8.7 points on 6 targets, 8.7 points on 8 targets, and then this 15.5, nearly going for 100 yards on 6 targets. So for the tight end position, which does not see a lot of love, and I know we don't love the tight end position. We don't love Jonnu Smith as a player, but he's getting the workload where you need to keep an eye out on him. And the next few matchups are Houston, Washington. He's got a Tennessee in there. He's going to have Minnesota, Arizona, like a lot of very easy defenses all before week 10. So the matchups line up and the workload kind of works out for him. So I don't know. I think it's worth, if you have to punt on the position, which a lot of people punt on tight end, why not add him? Why not give him a shot?
Nick is a Jonnu Smith guy. Always has been. Moving on to your defense and special teams. Here's some defenses you might be able to pick up on waivers depending on your league. The Commanders going up against the Bears on Thursday Night Football. The Bears are terrible. There you go. The Ravens going up against the Steelers. Now, I do have an update on Kenny Pickett out of the Fantasy Life app. I'll read it to you. Kenny Pickett's knee injury not serious. Will be fine. Not determined if he will miss time. I think they have a bye after this week. Am I wrong on that? I don't know. I get my buys kind of confused. Maybe they don't. Anyway, but I think Pickett will miss this week, but if Pickett plays, I don't know if I'd want to play the Ravens defense, but maybe, I don't know. Saints defense has been excellent. They're facing Mac Jones, who is bad. And the Colts defense going up against the Titans, just another really bad offense. So, Nick, how would you kind of power rank these if they are available on your waiver wire?
For me, Ravens and Saints. I just combined the two names. That was kind of weird. Ravens versus the Steelers. The Steelers' offense has been absolutely abysmal.
It's been bad.
I don't think Kenny Pickett's going to be out there. He looked absolutely terrible and needed a lot of help to get off of the field with a knee injury. There's no way they're going to rush him out there.
They should trade for Kirk Cousins.
You think everybody should trade for Kirk Cousins?
Anybody but San Francisco, and I'm good.
Well, they don't need him. They got Brock Purdy, the savior. Then you have the Saints going up against the Patriots. I like that matchup. Mac has not looked good. He's turning the ball over a lot.
Love it.
The Saints this past week allowed over 20 points in a game, but I think they had a 10-game stretch prior to where they did not allow over.
Yeah, not worried about it. The Bucs offense is a light years more talented than the Pats.
For sure. And then the two that are more likely available, the Colts and the Commanders. I would lean on the Colts a little bit more. I don't love I think the Bears.
I love the Commanders' front seven. That front seven is going to get a couple sacks. That's a couple points right there. And Fields is prone to turning the ball over. I like that a lot.
The only concern for me is that I know the Titans' offense is not explosive, and I know the Bears can be explosive.
Well, my argument against that is the Titans have one player on offense that take over every Bear, basically.
Yeah, that's fair.
Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry.
For sure. Yeah, I see where you're going, but for me, I think the safer pick is going to be the Colts. So I would take the Colts. It's a Thursday night game, so you're not going to know if you need upside. But if you think your team's going to need it in a tough matchup, then lean on the Commies.
Okay. I would rank them Saints, Ravens, Commanders, Colts.
Okay.
Moving on to our Week 4 recap. Going to give you our biggest takeaway from a fantasy football perspective for each game. I'm excited about this. A lot of good stuff to delve into. So, Nick, Thursday Night Football, Lions at Packers, your biggest fantasy football takeaway. Actually, I'm going to steal this because I'm a Montgomery guy. And
I was going to pass it over to you to talk about it.
There we go. Perfect. I don't understand this. I have to get this out there. I'm not like blind or I didn't have a dream. Like they definitely had a notification sent to our phones that David Montgomery is going to be out 6 to 8 weeks.
Yes, 100%.
I'm not that wasn't a dream.
No.
We had that on the news of our show, and they don't put him on the pup. He was questionable and didn't play, and then he plays the next week. I'm not complaining because in the running back area I was targeting, going 0 running back. So my running backs I loved were Alexander Madison, David Montgomery, James Cook, DeAndre Swift, and James Conner. I didn't get everybody. I got Swift in 1. I got Montgomery in 2. Got James Cook in 1. Didn't get James Conner. And I have Madison in 2. One was dynasty, so I kept him. But so I don't know exactly, was it misdiagnosed? I feel like Montgomery said himself it would take a couple weeks. And then he comes out against the the Packers. 10 days later, it's a Thursday night game. He has 32 carries for $121, 3 touchdowns, 2 receptions for 20 yards. Not really breaking the bank with that, but that's okay because he had a 35-point fantasy day. And again, I'm not complaining because I started him in 1 league, so I was worried about the injury and Jahmyr Gibbs. So I did start him in a league and benched him in the other. I don't remember who I benched him for. I can't tell you. But I was happy about it. And I'm not this is why I was pounding the desk before the season. Follow the money. It doesn't always work. There are going to be busts, but when a team decides to pay a running back, you just follow the money. I know people are worried about Jahmyr Gibbs, and I'll say my take on Gibbs. People are complaining about his usage and stuff, and I get it. But when this guy's running for 120 yards, what do you want them to do? What do you want them to do? Do you want them to just say, Jahmyr gets on a couple fantasy teams? That's just not how the NFL works. They wanted 2 really good running backs, and they're using 2 really good running backs. Now, I think what they should do is definitely use Gibbs more in the passing game. I think they should use him, maybe more a little bit as a receiver, but the NFL doesn't like to do that. That's my Jahmyr Gibbs take and my David Montgomery take. I was pretty thrilled with that. And Amon-Ra St. Brown is still really good.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I was in on Monty as well, not as much as Nick. I drafted him in a league purely because of Nick. Although he did get stuck on my IR, and then I couldn't move anybody on my lineup this week because I did not expect him to actually be out there and playing.
Why couldn't you move? Could you not drop somebody? Or I was able on Sleeper. I was able to take him out of my IR.
And on Yahoo, I was not able to. Once he had started, you couldn't move him off the IR, and then you couldn't make lineup adjustments. It was pissing me off.
Once who started? What do you mean when he started?
Once the 8 o'clock window started on Thursday,
Okay.
It wouldn't let me move anyone on my lineup anymore because of David
Okay.
Montgomery being
But
on
could
my
you have moved
IR.
him like earlier in the day on Thursday?
Yes, I could have. I just did not
Well,
have the time to move him, which was a
well,
pain.
I gotta be honest with you. You should have done that. Like that's a
Well,
Nick fault, not a Yahoo fault. I
it
did.
said questionable, and I wanted to play Aaron Jones, and I did not think David Montgomery was playing. It was
So what are your thoughts on
one of
Aaron
the biggest
Jones? Let's hear
flips.
that. I don't know
30,
if Aaron Jones is
30
your
points
take,
win.
but let's hear it.
I mean, listen, I don't have a problem with it. We knew both were questionable going into the game. My thought was Jordan Love with Aiden Hutchinson rushing him is going to have to pass the ball off more. And I did think that Jahmyr Gibbs would emerge a lot more in this game. Nope, did not happen. So I don't think a lot of people hit right on this game with what they thought the running back situation would be for either way. I will say this, Dave Montgomery did get his touches. He did get a lot of hits. He was healthy. He looked good. He got in the end zone. It was not extremely efficient, but you didn't need it to be efficient in this game. You needed to just run the clock.
I thought he was
And
really good.
Detroit next
I
week,
mean, he's averaging how many yards per carry? He's averaging
I think
3.8. Not
3-8.
bad.
Yeah,
Not bad.
it's not
Okay.
terrible. But now he's going up as a 9-point favorite against the Panthers. Like, you need to lock in David Montgomery off 10 days rest. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, he's one of the biggest locks that there's going to be at the running back position now.
I agree with you on that. Okay. Next game we have. I do have to go back to the notes just to make sure we stay on target.
London.
Bills, London, Falcons at Jags. Did you watch this one?
Yes, I did.
I did not. I was again the people that know where I work. I work really late on Saturdays. I was watching Michael Penix at Saturday night, so I did not wake up for the London game that my team was not playing in, and I actually have 0 fantasy players from this entire game. So yeah, I didn't wake up to watch it. What's your big
The only
takeaway
one I have
from
is
somebody
Trevor.
that?
The
What'd
only
you
one
say?
I have is Trevor Lawrence between
Okay,
any of
so
them.
from somebody that actually watched the game, what was your thoughts?
As my non-fantasy take, the Toy Story broadcast was horrendous to start, so I switched to the regular broadcast for the purposes of this podcast. But the highlights were pretty cool. And more of your fantasy takeaway, I do not think Trevor Lawrence is going to finish with a very good fantasy season. I'm not ready to drop him yet because there are so many favorable matchups in that division. But week 1, he had 18.7, and he has not broken 17 points since. Is 9, 15, and 16. He's being outscored by guys like Joshua Dobbs, Sam Howell, Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield, Brock Purdy, CJ Stroud. So he has been one of the biggest disappointments for fantasy. The Jacksonville Jaguars offense does not look great. Even though they did walk away with a win, I do not think they look like a very good team at the moment. And they had a 10-game stretch last year where they were very dominant and they turned around the season. But this season's been rough, and that offense has been rough. And Calvin Ridley is not panning out as much as we thought he would after the first quarter of week 1. I think it's one of the few teams where I think there's still a lot of question marks, and I don't know what to make. I think it might just be the culture of Jacksonville, where you're going to have those very high ceiling games and those very low floor games. And unfortunately, that consistency means pivoting off of Trevor Lawrence and putting him on your bench for a guy like CJ Stroud might be a better move for the rest of the season.
So I'm trying to figure out who actually scored touchdowns in this game. So Ridley had one, Trevor had one to him. I can't even tell you who else scored for the Jaguars.
There's a defensive touchdown.
That's what I'm missing, math. I guess my other big takeaway is Christian Kirk, 8 receptions for 84 yards. Again, I said he was the better at 12 targets. Again, I did say he was going to outscore Calvin Ridley. So that's a take that is aging well at the moment. But the Jaguars are trending down at the moment.
Yeah.
All right. Dolphins at Bills. And all the people that laughed at the Bills after week 1, you look pretty stupid right now because
I laughed at them. I'm
yeah,
still laughing at them. They blew it to the Jets.
They did, but the Jets are a good defense. It was emotional, and and listen, every team has a kryptonite in their division, and the Jets have kind of always played Josh Allen tough. I don't think he blows you guys out often. I think it's always kind of a
no. The Jets culture has always been the Jets have always been good against Allen.
So in our home league, Nick took Josh Allen in round 2 of our 12-man league. It's a keeper league, so I want to really call it round 3 because 12 guys are already off the board and pretty talented players at least. So Nick took Josh Allen, and it was a ballsy move, and he stacked them up with Stephon Diggs, who was his first round pick. How many points did they combine for this week in our league?
There's some bonuses. It was close to 9. Was it over 9? No, a little over
They didn't
90.
hit big bonuses too, so that's probably a standard score in most.
It was a 50-yard touchdown, which gave me the big boost. But
Okay.
overall,
They probably scored close to 80 or 75 in most leagues.
yeah, Josh Allen scored 36, and Diggs in full PPR put up 36, so 72. That's a big swing for the big touchdown. But
yes, so how I'm assuming that's probably a big takeaway at that point.
yeah, I mean, listen, it's why I wanted to stack them in that league, and Nick can tell you that is probably the best team I've ever drafted. It's 4 straight weeks of being three or 4 weeks number 1 in scoring, and one of them being number 2, only 2, Nick. I'm averaging a cool 165 points per game through 4
And an average is roughly 140, maybe.
Yeah, and my points against has been roughly 155. So thank the Lord that this team has been playing well. Although Mike Evans' hamstring worries me, and Mike Williams I just lost for the year, which sucks. But anyway, listen, the Bills have no problems. I would go trade for Gabe Davis right now. This offense looks very explosive. I would go trade for James Cook. Although he did not see the field as often as he did in the prior weeks. But these are guys that have had kind of a lot safer floors than I think a lot of people thought as to this point of the season. So I think you got a lot of trade for candidates on that side of the ball. I do want to talk a little bit about the Miami backfield because Mostert looked phenomenal 2 weeks ago, and this past week pretty much got cut out of the game plan for Chan.
Nick, Josh Jacobs or Raheem Mostert? Let me ask you the question I asked you last week.
Miami backfield.
No.
It was a combination. It was a combination. It was Nico Collins and Raheem Mostert. I would still take that trade today for Josh Jacobs. No problem with me still. I do think Mostert's going to bounce back. My only concern was seeing Chan on the field as much in the backfield, but they did put Mostert in the slot and they did rotate the two. So a lot of them were seeing that wide receiver 3 role. And then when one of them got the ball, Braxton Berrios stepped on the field. So they were on the field, even if they were not getting the usage, which for me in an offense as creative as this, I still love it. I mean, one of Chan, I'm going to still call him Chan. I don't care.
One of so much cooler. And I hate to say it, it's his name. Like my last name is Giacobbe. Like I wouldn't want somebody to call me Giacobbe. I feel for him, but Chan just sounds cool. Just does.
All right, so Chan on one of his rushing touchdowns was an end around where he was lined up in the slot. So like they're giving both of these guys weird opportunities because that's the Mike McDaniel system, the Kyle Shanahan system. So for me, I'm not like panicking on Raheem Mostert. I don't want to trade for him yet. I want to see one more week. But this was also a game where they were playing from behind. I think Miami's going to play from ahead in a lot more of these games. So do not panic. Like, I think both of them are still going to be very productive. I think they have the potential to be like that Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara duo, except both of these guys are very explosive. And then one single play can make your fantasy week.
I echo everything Nick said, except I'm not in on Raheem Mostert at all. And if you could have traded him, you probably should have. And if you still could trade him, I probably would. Okay. Denver Broncos at the Chicago Bears. The toilet bowl game.
Toilet bowl.
It wasn't even in the Octo box.
No, that was disgusting. That was pretty funny. I had to make fun of it.
So I guess pretty fantasy friendly. I mean, your biggest takeaway from this one?
Play whoever you can against each of these defenses because Justin Fields looked like prime Michael Vick and Russell Wilson. Well, he looked like, I guess, prime Russell Wilson, more like prime Peyton Manning in this matchup with that comeback win. But both these teams, I still don't love the outside weapons. DJ Moore has proven me wrong after I made fun of him after his week 1 dud.
But he's also not reliable. Like,
I get what you mean. It's like 2 big plays making up his whole fantasy day. Like, you know,
he had 8 receptions, 130 yards, and a touchdown, long of 29. Like, he was okay. Like, my bigger takeaway from the Bears offense is Khalil Herbert at 18 carries for 103. It's not good for my man Roschon Johnson. We knew Justin Fields was going to have a good game. Everybody told you it. If you could trade Justin Fields right now, probably should, and pick up CJ Stroud. And as for that Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson targeted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 receiving options. Can you just feed Jerry Jeudy? Like, please, come on. Like, you did it with guys like DK and Lockett and Dougie. Like, come on. Like, show him some love. He's your most talented receiver, and you're targeting all these other guys. Who got into the end zone this week? It was like McLaughlin got into the end zone, and like Brandon Johnson. He shows up on my red zone. I'm like, who is this guy? That's helped no one if I've ever seen it.
Yeah, I think the one thing that, even though I do like Jaleel McLaughlin as a play, the one thing that does concern me about the Denver Broncos is like you never know who the hell is going to be out on that field. Like they rotate way too many players. I think that is a part of their problem where they don't really have a set of these are our guys. It's like if you have two quarterbacks, you do not have a true quarterback. If you have 12 receivers, that does not mean you have a very good receiving core.
You should trade. We should trade Sean Payton for Nathaniel Hackett. That's what they should do. Okay. Also meant to mention that Javonte Williams does have the hip flexor, not expected to miss much time, if any. So keep tabs on the practice report. Ravens at Browns. So Deshaun Watson was ruled out before kickoff, and I think this was a surprise because he was questionable going in. I don't think he had thrown, but I thought the overnight report from Schefter was that he was going to play, and then he didn't. So
yeah,
he was questionable. The Browns are now on bye and then expected back, or Watson's expected to play against San Francisco in 2 weeks. It's a very bad matchup. So we had Dorian Thompson-Robinson start at quarterback, who threw for a whopping 121 yards, no tutties, 3 interceptions. Your big takeaway from this game from a fantasy football perspective?
Mark Andrews is he's coming to stay. He's averaging the most points per game at the tight end position. He missed week 1, and it's the exact reason why someone like me said I do not want Travis Kelce in the first when I can draft Mark Andrews in the second, because he's pretty much going to put up identical stat lines week after week after week, and you're getting him a whole round later where you could have paired a guy like Jamar Chase, even though he hasn't delivered. The perfect example would be you could have Tyreek Hill and Mark Andrews, or you could have Garrett Wilson and Travis Kelce, or Amon-Ra, who's great, but he's not Tyreek Hill at this point. It didn't get the value then, and I don't want to harp on drafts because it's 6 weeks ago, but the point being, if you did draft Mark Andrews, you have a very solid player in your lineup that is going to deliver the tight end 1 or tight end 2 over the course of the season.
Well, let me jump in because I am a Mark Andrews drafter, and his production this week was great. The touchdowns helped, 5 for 85. I'm disappointed in my Andrews draft and wish I hadn't drafted him and wish I'd taken TJ Hawkinson instead, actually. This week was great, but going forward. The Ravens offense is exactly what we expected, and that sucks for this reason, because if you have Lamar Jackson, that's great. Lamar threw for 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 2. Still really explosive, still a threat, especially in the red zone. They're designing runs for him. It's great. But if you have any other option, you are sitting on pins and needles the entire game, especially once they cross the 30-yard line because of Lamar Jackson. So if you have Mark Andrews, you're waiting to see if Lamar scores, because if he doesn't score, then Mark Andrews has a chance. Backs, they might be droppable, and this is what I was worried about when what's his name went down, J.K. Dobbins. None of the running backs are productive, because Lamar's running back 1. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's my takeaway.
I have a good question for you. Which would you prefer? So would you prefer any Ravens running back or Cam Akers? It's a tough one.
Justice Hill or Gus Edwards. I'd still rather Ravens running back because Madison looked decent this week.
I would rather Akers just because, if Madison misses time, he's going to be the guy, and all these Ravens running backs keep going down. I don't think I'd trust any Ravens running back in my starting lineup, but if Madison missed a game or 2, I would trust to start Cam Akers in that place.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, on to the Steeler game. I did not pick the Steelers in Survivor. Thankfully, I didn't already have a strike. I get 2 strikes, and they lost pretty badly to the Texans. So Steelers at the Texans on J.J. Watt Memorial Day. Kenny Pickett, knee injury. Earlier today, I literally have it in the notes, will miss some time. Latest report is that he might not miss time. So again, practice reports. Pat Fryermuth left the game with a hamstring injury and didn't return. Hammies tend to linger. So again, practice report. Watch it. Nick, your biggest takeaway that's not CJ Stroud, since we already spoke about him.
I mean, like, do you want to roster any Steeler at this point? Like, Najee Harris, I want to trade away. George Pickens,
not for nothing. Not for nothing. I don't love starting Najee Harris, but he had 71 yards and a reception for 32 in a game where they only scored 6 points. Like, I get what you mean. I don't love him either at the moment, but it's like I'm looking at this box score and he's not the problem here. Like,
listen, I do not say he's the problem, but what I will say
right.
is
I don't want him. You're right. I will not trade for him. I didn't draft him, and I will not trade for him.
Fine, like I don't think he's good. I was someone defending Najee, but
I think if Najee's contract was up this year, they wouldn't re-sign it.
Yeah, could it be? He was drafted 2020, so they could not pick up his 4th-year option. They could not pick up the 4th-year option.
He's a first-round pick.
Does he have the 4 years guarantee, or is it pick up the 4th?
I think it's 4 years guaranteed, then a 5th-year option.
Okay, so they're definitely not going to pay him. I think Najee is talented, but this offensive line is so abysmal, and the receiving core is so depleted. I mean, Pat Fryermuth got hurt during the game, and I think he's missed a little bit of time on some snaps because of some injury issues this week. But right now, Najee is the RB 37. George Pickens, I got to scroll down a little bit to find him, and I'm a big Pickens guy on the talent. He's at the wide receiver 34 right now with only 1 explosive game. Jalen Warren is the best ranking on anybody of all the guys on the team. He's at the running back 25. So, like, I don't know who you trust starting on this team. Like,
probably none. But if you're like me and you drafted Pickens high or high enough, you got to start him. Unless Kenny Pickett's out, then you really got to pivot. But if Pickett's in, I still got to start him.
No, you could pivot off Pickens at this point.
I don't know. On the Texans side of things, Dameon Pierce is in the same category as Najee, where he's good for like 20 carries, 60 to 80 yards, and no touchdowns. Like every week, it's okay, but he's touchdown or bust. Which is why I don't drafting my running backs. As for the receivers, you're going to be playing Russian roulette with Nico Collins and Tank Dell every single week. Nico 7, 168, 2. Tank Dell 1 for 16. It's going to be an every week thing, especially if you own both of them. I have a friend that played Tank over Nico Collins, so it's going to be an every week thing. Unfortunately, sorry, I was scrolling ESPN, and for some reason it is out of order in terms of our show notes. But that's okay. Vikings at Panthers is what I have next. Your big takeaway from this one, is that the Vikings should trade away Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I could see that happening. I don't really have much to take away.
QBR was 37.
I'm sorry?
His QBR was 37.
Yeah. I mean, he's looked great for the first 3 weeks of the season.
Want to guess Bryce Young's QBR? His passer rating was better than Kirk's. QBR was not.
I don't know, but he did not look good.
It was 17.
Yeah, that's rough.
I don't want to knock. I don't want to knock him because I don't want to knock him because I don't think he's bad. I think his team around him is really, really bad. They trade. Imagine him with McCaffrey. The team is so different. They keep McCaffrey, and the 49ers don't have McCaffrey. I think they have the Bears. Do they? Who has the? No, the Bears have the Panthers pick next year. They're so screwed.
Yes. Yeah, they're really going to be depleted.
Because
the only thing that they could do to save, they
need to trade for a receiver. They need to trade for somebody.
They're going to need a T. Higgins guy, and I think T. Higgins could be on the block very shortly. They got to get something because this team, that small body, is not going to survive. It's not going to work. I wouldn't be surprised if they went 0-17 this year.
Yeah, and the Bears get back-to-back picks. Yeah. Justin Jefferson was great, as always. TJ Hawkinson was not great. It's okay. It's an off game. Madison looked efficient, 7 for 95, average of 5.6 with a long 17. So that was an efficient game. Only 1 reception. So kind of in that same category we just spoke about with, Dameon Pierce and Najee. But, Cam Akers was 5 for 40 with a long of 10. I still think Madison's the starter until he just really looks bad. And maybe it's my, maybe it's my fantasy team talking since I do have Madison, but I don't think he looked as bad as, people needed out to be. All right. Rams at Colts. Nick had mentioned the Rams defense last week, and it looked like a really good start, like halfway through the game, and somehow the Colts came back. Again, I was focused on the Eagles game again for work reasons, but somehow the Colts came back. I blinked and yeah. So
it was weird because I was watching Red Zone and they were not on the screen anymore because it was 23-0. And then out of nowhere it came back and it was like, I think it was, 16 to 23 or whatever the combination was. Like, it was like the touchdown away when it came back onto the red zone. And
so injuries. No. Stafford left the game with a hip injury, but he returned. No doubt he plays this week, according to him. Jonathan Taylor to return from the PUP in practice. I think the GM said he's excited. Listen, I got him on IR in 2 leagues, so I'll be excited. Cooper Kupp will make his season debut as well next week. So it's bad news for Puka Nacua, who had 163-1. I am not worried about Nacua, though. His stats are going to go down. He's not going to have these stats, but I think he will still be a solid player, and Stafford's going to be a more sexy play. If he's on waivers, definitely I would go pick up Stafford because he's going to sling the ball around.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Stafford's definitely worth more of the roster and start at this point of the year. I'm very concerned about the Rams receiving core because I don't know how they can be an explosive team if their wide receiving core out there on every play and every snap is going to include Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, who are not down the field receivers. They're going to be your in between the 20s that get you down the chains and just get you the first down. Like, they're not going to be explosive, and that's not good for a guy like Kyren Williams. So I do think Puka Nacua is going to have to take a little bit of a backseat. If it were me, I would not start Nacua this upcoming week. I do think if you got him on the waivers, clearly you had someone else in your lineup that you're good enough to play. So I would not be looking forward to playing him this week.
I disagree. I just think he's shown too much upside. He has a connection with Stafford. I just don't think it goes away. Cooper Kupp's going to slot in there, and we'll take the bulk of this. But I think Van Jefferson, you drop him if he's on a team. Tutu Atwell, drop him. I just think he's option number 2. And Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams looks great. He's going to be your waiver pickup of the year at the moment. Kyren and Devon Achane. He's a great football player. Sorry, I can't pronounce his name. It is really simple, but it's just I've heard it a billion different ways at this point. And as for the Colts, Anthony Richardson might be a steal. 2 passing tutties, 200 yards, a rushing tutty, might 56 rushing yards too. He might be one of those late round steals that you targeted in around 12, 13 on. So good on you if you did that. But everybody else on the Colts, like I really just don't want.
Sure.
Okay. Bucks at Saints. I barely saw this on Red Zone, and I'm not sure if Alvin Kamara even returned to a football field this week.
You didn't watch the game? You didn't see the points?
For
Kamara?
I didn't.
Kamara had 13 catches for like 30 yards.
Well,
listen, if you play full PPR, which is the more fun and better way to play fantasy,
you know what? He scored more. And that's the thing that annoys me about running backs, because this is like, I love PPR. I'll never not play PPR. But a guy like Dameon Pierce had like 18 carries for like 80 yards, and he had 8 fantasy points. And as Kamara, 13 receptions for 33 yards, at 16 points right there, and then he had 51 rushing yards, so he had 18 fantasy points. So I stand corrected. He did have a good fantasy game and probably helped your fantasy team. Yeah, I mean, what else do you got from this one? Derek Carr stinks. Why was he out there? Jameis had the revenge game. That's why you lost this game. This is karma for not letting Jameis go out there and get you guys.
Is this the 3rd or 4th season of Jameis Winston revenge games? Like, whatever. This would be the first game that Jameis would have started against the Bucks. Let me tell you something. Derek Carr is going to be Ryan Fitzpatrick level journeyman, and I feel bad because he's a great guy.
That's a good one.
It's sad. Like,
he got screwed by his roster. I mean, his roster ownership,
playing through an injury.
Brown. I mean,
it's rough. It's rough. And on the other side of the ball, a guy I dislike in Baker Mayfield has become like a fan favorite all over again. And I'm not going to lie, I've been rooting for him lately, not just because I have Mike Evans, but he's doing things the right way, and the team looks pretty good, and he looks pretty good. And I think that Buccaneers team is really clicking, and now they're going to go into a bye, and I'm worried about Mike Evans with a hamstring because You never want to see an older player with a hamstring injury. It's going to bother him until at least week 11, but he'll get out there. He'll play again. You're not going to bench him off the bye.
Chris Godwin stepped up big time. 8 receptions, 114. Still no touchdowns on the season. At least I don't think he has a touchdown on the season, which does stink. It's just one of those things. My man Olave disappeared. Like, it's going to happen. I read out what his stats could be after last week in a 17-game season, and I did say he was not going to have 160 catches for 1,800 yards. It wasn't going to happen. He had a dud. Move on to next week. Commanders at the Eagles.
I can't believe the commies came back.
They play them tough. They didn't come back. I mean, they were up in the game. But they
scored a touchdown at the last second to send it into overtime.
They did. I guess it's comeback technically, but yeah, I mean, game's exactly kind of what I expected. Do you have a big takeaway? Everything kind of looks the same to me.
Yep. I mean, we don't want to harp on it. I feel bad for any Eagles or Commies fans, but you got exactly what you expected from these teams.
AJ Brown was awesome. He's been awesome the last 2 weeks. Had his little tiny scuffle with Hurts that the media made a big deal about. Was clearly nothing. Awesome game. He probably won you a week. Devontae Smith on a bad week. I guess I don't know. I mean, he had 7 for 78, still 15 fantasy points. He was good. DeAndre Swift couldn't really get going, but had the touchdowns that saved his day. Hurts had a good day. Terry McLaurin had a solid day, including a touchdown, which was ridiculous. Brian Robinson is the running back one over there, and that stings for people that drafted Gibson. Biggest loser on this offense so far has been Jahan Dotson. I mean, Nick, we're both high on him. Nick a little bit higher, and it does suck. Again, not everybody you're high on is going to pan out, but it does that. We were pretty high on him. I think I got him in one league. How many leagues did you get him in?
I didn't draft him anywhere.
Oh, he was one of your guys. Didn't get him anywhere. Okay.
I couldn't get him.
All right.
Wanted him.
The Bengals at the Titans. Ugh, what a game.
You could talk about the Bengals because every time I talk about them, I jinx them. Although last week I did say that they got bigger problems than a one-off injury by Joe Burrow, and they proved this week.
Well, T. Higgins is a rib fracture, could be out for a bit. Higgins says he plans to be back maybe in a week or next.
I don't buy it.
Yeah,
I saw a report he couldn't lay on one side of his body because of how much pain he was in. Like,
I got nothing. I mean, I got nothing for this one. Like, Hopkins had his typical day, 4 for 63 with Ryan Tannehill. Derrick Henry had a good Derrick Henry game. Joe Mixon got bottled up by a good front seven. Jamar Chase had a solid day. T got hurt. Joey had a bad day. Like, I can't tell you. I can't say if it's the Bengals. I mean, the injury from Burrow. I don't know what to tell you. It is what it is. I think the Bengals don't look like a good football team right now, and that's disappointing because before the season or before the calf injury, I think we would have said this is probably a top 3 fantasy offense.
Sure.
I said, they have 2 get-right games. They're either going to win these games and click, or their season's over. That's the end of it.
The one big takeaway I would say is I think a lot of people were worried about Derrick Henry, and I will happily say I was one of them because Tajay Spears last week was on the field more, outscored him for fantasy, and feels like Derrick Henry has never been outscored by a running back in a game where he played the entire thing. And then he bounces back with a 24-point bomb in a game. And I think that the Titans are going to start to pivot back and say, we just got to give the guy the rock and let him do his thing. And for me, that makes me even more excited for his 2 playoff matchups against the Texans. Although the Texans look a lot better than I thought they would. Derrick Henry averages over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns a game against them.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that. All right, Raiders at the Chargers, and a round of applause for my favorite stat sheet stuffer.
Mr. 2-2.
Mr. 2-2. He did not stuff the stat sheet. He did have a good fantasy game because he had the 2 rushing touchdowns, but did not stuff the stat sheet. So a little disappointed that he didn't stay on brand.
I don't know. I mean, he's the QB1 in fantasy, which means you stuff some shit. You stat
he is. I mean, to be fair, I think you were high on him, and I was also. I'm not high on him as a player like you, but as a fantasy option, I did love him, and I love his.
Yeah,
ADP.
we both loved him.
Like, I did love his AD. I thought it was ridiculous that his ADP was like 3 rounds behind Burrow and Lamar and Fields, and then there's Herbert who's going to throw for like 4,000 yards.
Sure.
Now they were up like 21-3, I think, and they just like stopped trying. That's a Charger problem. It's a coaching problem, and I do put some of it on Herbert. You guys got to just you did it in the playoff game. Like they should have lost this game, and they didn't.
I think the problem for the first few games has been not having Eckler because the rest of their running backs have been so abysmal and not been able to break anything loose. Where Eckler was a guy that was going to average 5 yards per carry because of how explosive he is out on the field. And Joshua Kelly and Isaiah Spiller are anything but that. The Chargers do not look great. Their defense does not look great, except Khalil Mack, who returned with a revenge game of 6 sacks in a single game, which is nuts. Almost broke the NFL record of 7, which is insane to think about.
Wait. Timeout. So I was focused on the 49er game after the Eagles game, work reasons. So I didn't really see a lot of this. Josh Jacobs had 58 yards, a tutty, and then went 8 for 81. And you're telling me you still want Raheem Mostert over him?
Yes.
Come on. You're killing me.
I don't want Raheem Mostert one-on-one over him. The combination of Nico Collins and Raheem Mostert I'd rather have than Josh Jacobs. I don't understand what's hard to believe about that. He did it against the Chargers defense, who I told you last week he would have no problem beating because the Chargers defense sucks. He did it with Aiden O'Connell as well. It's not like he did it with Jimmy G, who's going to come back from a concussion this week.
Yep. I have nothing else on this game. Keenan Allen was okay. He had a touchdown. You're not going to get 250 yards, every single week.
Correct.
Okay. Next game, the Patriots at the Cowboys. What a whopping. I think it was the largest loss that Bill Belichick had as a head coach for the Patriots. I think that's correct. Something like that.
I think it was in 19 years. Something ridiculous. Or longer than that. It was Brady.
It was whopping. Loss. So your biggest fantasy takeaway from this one?
I mean, I really wanted Ramondre going into the year. And when they took Zeke, I said, like Ramondre was a guy I would have ranked inside my top 5 up until Zeke came in. And then Zeke came in and it was like, I guess you take him at his ADP. Like, he's been so bad. And I know it's a tough matchup this week, but he has not broken 12 fantasy points in a single game this year. That's standard. In full PPR, he's not broken 15, which for a guy you took in the second round or third round of your fantasy drafts is not very good. He's the RB23. He's being outscored by Khalil Herbert, Rashad White, Joe Mixon, Alexander Madison, Zach Moss, Jerome Ford, like guys that weren't even guaranteed the RB1 on their own team are now outscoring him. And it sucks because he was so good after Damian Harris went down. Week 3 last year to week, I want to say 15 or 16. He was a locked and loaded 10 points to 15 points per game. He had some 20-point bombs and looked really good. And they bring in an OC and you think it's going to work out. And again, crushing after crush after crush. And this week they gave him a 70% snap share. So it's not even like you could say Zeke got to play more time. No, Ramondre got the field time he deserved to have. And Mac Jones just absolutely blows as a quarterback. Period.
Tony Pollard has not been the top 15 player that was drafted. It's disappointing. And I think he'll get going when the offense starts to get going. But in a game like this, the offense did not need to really put up a lot of points, and that's just how it goes sometimes. So I still think he's really talented, but I would like to see his usage, ticked up a bit.
There is also
Cardinals,
just real quick, one more thing that's like an absolute steal of the draft that no one's talking about is the Dallas Cowboys defense right now. And defense is different in every single league, but according to the generic ESPN league that you start with, they're averaging 20 points per game. I mean, that's literally the equivalent. I mean, the next highest is 14, then 11. I mean, they're practically twice as good as your opponent's defense. And you don't really trade for defenses, but if you're making a trade where you're slightly off in your deal, like see if you could get the guy to throw in the Dallas Cowboys defense, because they might not think it's as big of a deal as it is. But unless if you have Buffalo or Tampa, the next defenses are averaging 10 points per game at best. So go steal the Dallas Cowboys, who have 80 total fantasy points right now, which would put them just to put them in categories, that would be good enough to be your QB8 on the year. It'd be good to be your RB2, your wide receiver 1, your tight end 1. Like, I mean, they've been literally phenomenal. Period.
So the Cardinals at the 49ers. This was the Christian McCaffrey game. He had 4 total touchdowns, 106 rushing yards, 71 receiving yards. He had like 50 fantasy points, like ridiculous. Marquise Brown was efficient. James Conner was just okay against a tough defense. My big takeaway just kind of is like McCaffrey's great, and I wish I had drafted him. And Brandon Ayuk is proving everybody that had him over Debo right, and that sucks because I have Debo and Kittle, who are the number 3 and 4 options on a very talented offense. And my last takeaway, Brock Purdy may be the real deal, and he might take the 49ers to a Super Bowl and win it, and that sucks a lot.
That sucks for you as a Seahawks fan.
It does.
As a Jets fan, that division has Tua and that elite offense and the Bills and their elite team. I get it. Yeah, I know people are talking CMC and how good he's been. He's right back to being the dominant RB1 for your team, and it does look like he's the better draft pick than Justin Jefferson at this point, and why a lot of people say take RB first. I mean, CMC, I get it. Like, he's got 120 points this season. The next best is Raheem Mostert at 89. So the gap from 1 to 2, he's averaging 30 points per game, and it's not just this 50-point massacre. He has not scored less than 22 points in a single game this year. Like, the consistency has been crazy. And I know we didn't talk about Elijah Mitchell. He's missed 2 of the first 4 games. Week 3, he scored 10 points as well. And in 2 games where he has played, Christian McCaffrey is still averaging 24 points per game. Mitchell might be worth the edge just because so many 49ers tend to get hurt and you don't root for injury, but he's rostered in so few leagues right now because of injuries and not being out there and CMC being dominant, where you might want the stash if you're losing your running backs for the year, or if you have some of these guys, if you don't not have a reliable running back and you need to do one of those pray for another running back to, miss some time and get 2 games, like, he's got to be one of those guys.
All right. Chiefs at Jets, Sunday night football. Not very fantasy friendly, but your big takeaway.
If you get that version of Zach Wilson week to week, and I don't think you will, but they're going up against the Broncos this week. Garrett Wilson's going to be fine with that. Like, he had a very solid fantasy day. He didn't have a great
9 for 60, 15 yards. 15 points. That's okay.
Yeah, like, if he's going to, his targets have gone up every single week. I don't think Simeon's going to get the start after this week. It might transition after the bye week because they're going to go Denver, and if they lose to Denver, then they go to Philly. Like, that's not a great matchup for the Jets at all. So, but the only point being, if Zach can sustain some level of QB competency, you can see this Jets team being successful. And we didn't talk about him in the tight end segment, but I did tell your brother that I was going to talk about him because I said it in our conversation. I do think Tyler Conklin up against those Broncos is going to be a very sneaky good start for a lacking tight end position.
Pacheco looked great. I don't know if this is going to translate to the next weeks, but it's something to keep your eye on. Kelsey
he always plays well in New Jersey. He did it against the Giants too because he's a Rutgers guy.
Weird.
That's what it is. He plays well in his hometown.
Kelsey 6 for 60. He was okay. Not the first round pick that you drafted, but everybody's going to have down games, and he just has to shake it off. I had to get one in. All right. That is our week 4 recap. That is our show, our episode 8. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you took some knowledgeable information away. Yeah, so that's that. So thank you guys who listened. If you're a first-time listener, again, you can subscribe on all audio streaming platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching the show on YouTube or would like to watch the show on YouTube in the future, whether it's a live show or a recorded show, go to our YouTube channel, Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Hit the subscribe button, drop a like, and yeah, share the links with your friends. Hit that bell notification so you do get notifications every time we go live. Follow us and interact with us on social media. We can answer all of your start-sit questions, trade questions, anything throughout the week. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, PrimeTimeFFPod. Facebook and YouTube is Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Thank you guys for listening to us. Thank you for supporting, and we'll talk to you guys very soon.